Hello and welcome back to the SC-500 cyber security exam. In this occasion, we are going to look at SC-500 Objective 1.6, implement and configure managed identities for Azure resources. Hello, I am Ceolito Rodriguez. Managed identities for uh, Azure resources are a secure way for resources to authenticate to other Azure services without storing passwords, secrets, certificates, or client credentials in application code. In traditional application design, developers often had to store credentials in configuration files, environment variables, or key vaults. Managed identities reduce that risk by allowing Microsoft Entra ID to provide an identity directly to the Azure resource. How do managed identities work then? So first, an Azure resource such as a virtual machine, an app service, Azure function, Logic app, or automation account is assigned a managed identity. That resource uses the identity to request an authentication token from Microsoft Entra ID. The token is then used to access another Azure service, such as Azure Key Vault, Azure Storage, Azure SQL, or another supported service. The application does not need to know or store a password because authentication is handled through Microsoft Entra ID. There are different types of managed identities. One, actually two. A system assigned managed identity is created directly on a single Azure resource. Its life cycle is tied to that resource. If the Azure resource is deleted, the identity is deleted too. This option is best for simple scenarios where only one workload needs secure access. And two, a user assigned managed identity, which is created as a separate Azure resource. We'll see that in a little bit in the demo. It can be assigned to multiple resources and remains available even if one of those resources is deleted. This is useful when several workloads need the same identity or when the identity must exist independently. For security and exam focus reasons, managed identities solve the authentication problem, but they do not automatically grant access. After creating or enabling the identity, an administrator must assign the correct permissions using Azure RBAC or service specific access controls. For example, if an Azure function needs to read secrets from Key Vault, the managed identity may receive the Key Vault secrets user role. For the SC-500 exam, focus on least privilege, the difference between system assigned and user assigned identities, and the idea that managed identities remove credential management while RBAC controls authorization. The key concept is simple. Managed identity proves who the workload is. RBAC determines what the workload can access. That being said, let's now get into the demo. This is the Microsoft Azure portal where you can get through the portal.azure.com. Let's click into our subscription. We're not going to go directly into manage identities because we need to take a look at a couple of things and where this is going to be applied. So I'm going to be looking at my subscription for this tenant. And if we, there's a lot of information you can look at because, again, we are going to apply these roles at the subscription level. So a lot of details you can look at this, but we want to go into the access control, identity and access control management portion of this. And let's take a look into roles, first of all. When we are talking about active roles, remember that these are different than the uh, Microsoft Entra roles that we have discussed before. These roles are to give access to the resources themselves, not to give access to the directory, like the Entra that we have discussed as well. Here we have three of the most common roles: the owner, the contributor, and the reader role. The description will tell you what the role does, right? Grant full access to manage all resources. So if you have the owner role to a resource, if you have the owner role to the subscription, then you have access to the entire subscription. You can do basically anything. This is a built-in role. It's a Microsoft built-in role because we can also create our own custom roles, which we'll also discuss here. And some roles are organized by categories. This is a general role. If I click on the view to look at the details, I can see here again the description. It grants full access to manage all resources, including the ability to assign roles in Azure RBAC. And we can see there are tons of permissions that this role does. We can look at that here. The permissions are divided into actions and data actions. In this case, this is just data actions. There's no data actions, not data action. We'll discuss that in a minute as well. Those are the permissions. We could look at this in JSON format as well, because we could modify and import and export JSON files if we needed to. But anyway, so here is the role name. It's the owner, the description that we just saw, and it's assigned. The scope is the root at the root of the subscription. So anything under the subscription has that role. Permissions, actions basically mean it's everything. That's what that asterisk is all about. And there's no restrictions. That's why you don't see anything in not actions, not data actions, not data actions here either. So basically meaning, if you have that role to a resource, you can do anything to that resource. If you had any denied assignments, then that would be on this part over here. If we look at, so we're looking at all the roles over here, and if we go to the bottom, we notice that there are, as of this recording, there are 910 different roles. There are plenty of roles in Microsoft Azure, and the best practices that try to find a role that suits your needs, and then, well, if you can, then you can create your own. But it's not very common to create own roles because most of the time these roles are enough. We can look at by job function roles right here too. So we can see that based on functions. And we could also look at privilege administrator roles for access resources. And then here we see the owner, the contributor, the user access administrator, which is a very common one as well. And this is the SC-500 admin role. This is a common role that I created. And you'll see that it says custom role. It's a custom role that I just created. And so again, You could take a look at that over here. If you want to, let's say that you want to look at virtual machine roles, you can do that here as well. And it's interesting because in most of these exams, there are a lot of questions about roles. So you really need to understand this exam is superseding the AZ-500. And I remember when I took the AZ-500, there were a lot of questions about roles. And one of the most confusing thing is that when you look at let's say the virtual machine contributor role, if we click on the view, this is a compute role, and actually this one. So if we click on the view to look at the details, it says lets you manage virtual machines, but not access to them. So you can manage them, but you don't have access to the virtual machine. You cannot actually log in to the virtual machine. And to me, that was really confusing originally when I was like, wait a minute, I'm the contributor. I cannot access the machine. Well, you are the contributor to the resource. You can manage the resource, but that doesn't mean that you need to access that machine, right? And not the virtual network or storage account that they're connected to. So you don't have access to any of that. If you need to be able to log in to the virtual machine, you get two. You get the virtual machine user login, and then this will view virtual machines in the portal and log in as a regular user. And then the virtual machine local user login, you can view virtual machines in the portal and log in as a local user configured on the Arc server if you're using Microsoft Arc, which we will discuss in a future video. But it's important to understand again, um, you know, because you're going to get questions about some of these roles, and it's really important to understand what this role do. As I said, the user um, access, it's another uh, user access. Okay, user access. Huh. It's not coming to. Okay, let's try it again. Actually, if we go to the privilege roles, it'll be here anyway. So if we click on the um, this role, it lets you manage user access to Azure resources. So if you want someone to be able to give access to user access to resources, then you can assign that person this role. I'm logged in as the global admin, but remember the global admin is just for Active Directory resources. There may be a lot of stuff here that I don't have access if I don't give myself access to the resources. It's important to understand that. But anyway, so we can give ourselves access to this here as well. All right. Okay, so now let's go into what we came here for, basically. But I just wanted to explain that because you need to understand access to resources and owners and stuff like that uh, before you can go into this managed identity. So let's take a look at let's go home. And normally when you come here into Azure, you'll see stuff depending on what you have been doing. Here is showing the most recent access to resources that I have. So here is the managed identity. But if, let's say, you don't see that up there, again, the key is to look for stuff over here. So manage identities, then you can search for, and then you'll find it over here. And I already created a managed identity, but let's go into the process. So let's click on create a managed identity, and you need a resource group. I'm going to use the SC-500, and let's name this managed identity 2, just for the sake of it. You need a region, isolation scope. You could also do that if you wanted to. We're not going to get into that now. And you could go to new, create tags and stuff like that. But let's just create the um, user assigned managed identity, and let's click into this. And let's see how we use this thing. So remember that this is to give access to resources. So if I go to that resource, then here are those managed identities that I'm talking about. And I can, click on the, manage from here. But let's say that if I go back into my resources, here I have a VM that I created earlier. If I click into this VM and I come into security, in security I get this identity component, and by default this is off. So, and this is the system assigned managed identity. As we discussed before, a system assigned managed identity is restricted to one per resource, and it is tied to the life cycle of this resource, meaning that you can grant permissions to the managed identity by using Azure role-based access control. And then the managed identity is authenticated with Microsoft Entra ID, so you don't have to manage or store any credentials in code or anything like that. And you would just basically turn this on, click on save, and basically that would do it. And normally you decide whether, depends on the requirements and whether resources, um, you could manage this. You could add a role assignment here. Whatever you want that VM to be able to do, you could assign that there. And then if we wanted the it's not common to have managed and user assigned identity, so you would choose either or. But user assigned managed identities enable Azure resources to authenticate to cloud services, for example, Azure Vault, without storing credentials in code. This type of managed identities are created as a standalone Azure resources. And so when you go into what that basically means is, let's go back into um, the home here and click on manage identities. And that's basically what it's talking about, that these are independent resources. Uh, when we created that of this, I could create manage identities. That's basically what it's talking about. So again, going back into my VM, so come to security, and then you can assign either, if we turn this off, and let's say that we want to use this managed identity with all the VMs. Let's say that this VM is part of a scale set, and we want to manage this identity independently, then we could go to manage identities. We can click on add, and then so here is the managed identity one that I want to assign to this resource. Click on add, and that's how you would use this managed identity. Okay, so that's basically what that means over there, and that's it. With that we conclude this section on managed identities. Thank you for watching. Hope this has been informative. If you like this kind of content, please click on like it, or even more important, please subscribe to my channel. It would mean a lot to me, and also you would be informed when more of this content is created. Well, thank you for watching, and hope you can follow me on the next episode of this series.